Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now move on to More Neighbours Toronto. Please just state your name at the beginning of the presentation and please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Eric Lombardi and I'm an advocate and founder of More Neighbours Toronto. We are a volunteer, multi-partisan housing activist organization that is trying to secure the reforms that are required to end the housing crisis in Toronto and in Ontario. Now, you have a lot of speakers who will be joining us to speak to very specific items within Bill 23. But the reason why we're all here is that Ontario faces a housing crisis. And yes, the word crisis is thrown around pretty liberally these days. However, this one is real. Since 2010, housing prices in Toronto have tripled. More than 200% over, that is a gain of over 200% on what they were in 2010. In the meantime, incomes have only increased 30%. Obviously, the cost of housing is vastly outstripping the increases in income that we're seeing. I'm 28 years old, and I'm lucky to have a very good job as a professional in technology. However, there are huge impacts that I've seen from my own peer group, particularly those from high school who did not pursue careers that I would describe as being part of the rat race. So my friend who became an electrician, he is stuck at home. My friend who became a teacher, she's stuck at home. She can't make it work, so she's going back to school so that she can find a career that will pay her more money so that she has a chance to have a family that she desires and be able to afford living in this province. Another friend of mine, a nurse, and her partner, a logistics dispatcher, have moved away from Toronto because it is impossible to afford the amount of space to start a family. How are we, in Ontario, going to achieve a greater level of prosperity in the future when we are chasing out the future of this province from being able to live here? I studied engineering at the University of Waterloo. More than half of my classmates moved to the United States because it simply does not pay to live here anymore. One of my best friends, one of the most brilliant people I know, bought a house for $1.5 million, and now he no longer desires to start a business. We are really screwing the future in this province. And so when it comes to Bill 23, I attended this announcement and there was a lot of fanfare and rhetoric over the end of NIMBYism in Ontario, that we were going to take action against the bananas, the build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything type of attitude that permeates this province. And then when I look at the actual bill itself, the only thing I can describe is this bill will achieve nothing other than slowing down the rate at which things get worse in this province. This is not a substantial enough reform to truly change the trajectory of housing affordability in this province. There are some very excellent reforms that are a part of this bill. Changes and improvements to MTSA areas that we desperately need. We should really expand the definition of what an MTSA area is and maybe create a new boundary around, near MTSAs. Changes to heritage conservation are also very needed. I live very close to an entire strip in Leslieville that was created as a heritage conservation district that really contains very unremarkable buildings. This process has been abused in the past. There are other changes that I would describe that this government is taking that are penny wise and pound foolish. They might make some short-term gains in the ability to create new housing, but in the long term are going to raise taxes or diminish the investment in services and ultimately lead to a lower quality of living. This is what happens when you invest in additional sprawl. Unfortunately, with sprawl, all those new infrastructure is paid for by the initial development. But because of the space that is used and the fact that infrastructure relates much more to land area than density, all of these places are actually vacuums of tax dollars over the long term to maintain and replace infrastructure that exists there. This is not a method that will ultimately create affordability in this province, because the reason why Toronto is expensive and this region is expensive is because people will want to live near the communities and family and friends that they grew up around, and immigrants want to live near the networks that they already have established here, and everyone wants to live close to where they work. So how are we going to solve these problems? This bill, Bill 23, is only an increment in the direction that we need to go, and it is not urgent enough. So you might have received a pamphlet that I just had distributed, and it says, Ontario's housing crisis will only get worse from here. I encourage you to open it, because in it is the truth. Until growth becomes legal, and not just legal, but feasible in all existing neighborhoods, we are not going to be on a path to solving this problem. This committee and this legislature has an opportunity, because I know there are bipartisan interests that want to solve this problem in this province. But neighborhoods have been overprotected from very mild forms of growth for far too long in this province. And, there's a fear of the backlash that might happen if we were to legalize, for example, fourplexes up to 4 stories in neighborhoods, a top recommendation of the government's own housing affordability task force. But there are more than 2.5 million single-family homes in this province. If just 1 in 10 over the next 10 years was developed into a fourplex, hardly a dramatic change at all,
Final minute.
you would produce 750,000 units of housing, more than half of the province's goal towards achieving $1.5 million. The reason why this is not being pursued is because many in this government seem to be afraid of change. But I am afraid of what happens to our province if we don't change. The healthcare crisis, how you can get nurses and personal support workers to live near people if they can't afford to live in the city. The fertility crisis, how is my generation going to be able to have children if we can't move out? There are 100,000 unformed families as a result of this housing crisis, people deprived of the opportunity for domestic dreams, families, and all these things that we value in our life. It is time for this government to take this more seriously. It's time to protect renters, because reducing rental replacement or eliminating rental replacement policies is going to displace the working poor from our city even more. And that's actually going to make all of our quality of life and the services we depend on those workers for even worse.
Thank you very much, sir.
Please.
That's the end of your projection.